Hey everyone, welcome back to COVID Chats. This is episode 34 with my guest Sophie Shapiro. Sophie is a clinical social worker in Bed Stuy, Brooklyn. She's a therapist for adults, adolescents, and families. It was really a great comprehensive discussion. As you might notice, this is a new angle on the COVID Chats. I was trying to break the routine a little bit, which is something you'll hear us talk about in this episode. I have to thank Anya Gips and Adam Chanis, two friends of mine, who helped me come up with some questions to ask Sophie, and overall made me think about, what tact I wanted to approach this episode with. And thank you again for those questions, guys. They were really helpful. And I think it was a really great conversation, which I know I say a lot on the intros, but what can I say? I think a lot of the conversations are great. Not to pat myself on the back too much or the guests on the back too much, but yeah, no, really it was, it wasn't strictly melancholy. There were some real highlights, a lot of silver linings that we tried to find. And I think overall it was very helpful for both people who have an interest in social work and therapy, and also just outsiders who are interested in how people in these fields are coping, how their clients are coping. And there's a lot of takeaways for those sorts of people, and just how to do our best in trying times. And I know we're in the process of reopening. Tomorrow is supposed to be a big threshold here in New York, May 28th. But regardless of that, there's a lot of adapting to do, both to the quarantine and also how we're going to adapt once this is over. So all good things to think about, all important things to think about. And now on to the episode. Hello, Sophie, and welcome to episode 34 of COVID Chats.
Hi, Ruben.
Great to have you on the program. Long time no see. So I think it's going to be a fun one, an informative one, perhaps a little melancholy for moments of it. But I think it should be full of great information for the audience, for me. Hopefully I'm able to provide something of service for you as well. So,
Yeah.
so we'll see on that regard. But I'd like to start the program with, just a how are you doing before we get into the questions about you and, your work.
I'm doing okay. I am working from home, and like a lot of people, doing most of my socializing from home digitally, talking to people on Zoom, and started to expand out a little bit more. But I think that's been the toughest part, is the isolation and stuff has been hard. But I feel really lucky. Like, I've been healthy, my family's been healthy. We're lucky. So yeah.
Yeah. I think the health has definitely been the biggest factor for people that I've talked to, and I mean, it makes sense, right? Especially in the wake of a virus that's attacking one's health. I mean, if you have the health, Zooming with your friends for a cocktail hour is not the end of the world.
Totally.
We
It puts it in perspective too.
Yeah.
When you see everything that's going on for people, it's like, all right, I guess I don't have it that bad.
Yeah, right. We're constantly checking, what we have, our privilege, which seems to be the term du jour of late, for good reason, probably. So, you're a social worker, which you mentioned to me in your bio, which I appreciated. And I'm wondering, what's been the process of supporting people remotely, and, how have you managed to engender resiliency in such a difficult time?
Yeah. So when, I think on like March 16th or 17th, when schools shut down and everything, we started working from home. And I've been providing video and phone telehealth, teletherapy to my clients, who I used to see either in the office where I work, which is in Brooklyn, or I also made home visits for some of my clients who were medically fragile or elderly. So now all of that in-person stuff is happening through video or over the phone. And the question about resilience it's very important and a tough one. I work with adults and children, actually mostly adolescents. I don't work with young kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen a range of responses to everything that's going on. And I guess what I'm trying to do is meet each person where they are, whether that's continuing to work on the themes and the development that we were working on before COVID happened,
Mm,
or if it's just pausing everything we were doing in our clinical work before and saying, you know what, we just need to attend to like the crisis that's happening for you right now.
right.
Um, whether that was like helping people get access to emergency food resources, or helping them set up remote learning for their kids, or
Mm,
a variety of other kind of crisis oriented things. Um, for some people that was what they needed, and we'd been focusing on that. Other people were like, let's just continue what we've been doing, working on more like clinical therapeutic work. So it's really varied.
mm.
Yeah.
So sort of meeting people where they are, just seeing what are their needs at this moment.
Yeah, totally. And I would say that usually my job involves more clinical therapeutic work, but I do some kind of case management, helping people with access to resources and benefits. And I've seen at the beginning of this, especially, there was a spike in that kind of work that I was doing, which I was happy to do, because
Right,
honestly, it feels more productive sometimes to get people access to meals than to talk about how you feel about your anxiety, you know?
right, right. Yeah,
So
especially
for
if,
me as a clinician, wait, can you see me?
yeah. There was a tiny lag, but I got you.
Okay. For me as a clinician, I sometimes struggle with feeling like, am I really being effective for people when they have other like foundational needs that are going on in their lives? Because I work
Absolutely.
mostly with low income people who are struggling with various socioeconomic struggles. Um, and so sometimes it feels nice to just like give you resources and get you food to eat and medical care and whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely, especially if some of those sources of anxiety are the fact that access to food might be a struggle. If you can help them with the access to food, but then boom, you help them a little bit with the anxiety too. So it's almost a two birds, one stone situation.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing that I'm seeing is um, that there's a lot of loss. People are really struggling with, for very good reason, with loss, and also like what's the word? Sort of predicting future losses.
Mm,
Um, we know that COVID is hitting communities of color and low income communities the hardest, and that's the population that I work with for the most part. And so, although I feel very grateful I haven't lost any clients, and I haven't even had any clients who are severely ill,
mm,
but almost everyone I talk to has family members or close friends or people in their immediate circle who've passed.
right.
So just doing a lot of grief work with people,
Mm,
um, and kind of uh, in rapid, like I'll call someone for our session and they'll say, oh, my grandmother died, and it's just so sudden, right? Like it's
right.
just popping up out of nowhere. So really kind of, like I said, meeting people where they're at, just,
Mm,
oh, what happened today? Okay, let's deal with that.
right. Right. Especially when this was, first breaking out in those days of March, things were happening very, very rapidly. And it was just, there's so much uncertainty. I think it was
Yeah.
definitely hard for you. I'm sure it was just as hard for, those clients. I noticed at the beginning of your answer to the first part of the question, you put sort of telehealth in quotes a little bit. I'm just wondering why.
Yeah, I personally, I think it's a great option, as sort of like a stopgap for like when things do fall into crisis and we need to help people, like doctors, medical doctors across the board, right? All the different kinds of providers. It's obviously been like really key in this period of time when we're trying to do social distancing. As a therapist, I find it to be very detached and disconnected and unsatisfying.
Mm,
I think that one thing that I really cherish about the work that I do is the human connection, and like
yeah.
being in a room with a person or a family, and tuning into them emotionally and being present with them.
Mm,
And that is possible over Zoom or various platforms that we use, but it's very different.
mm,
One thing that I really feel is, when I'm doing a one-on-one session with someone, we're in the room together. We can each see each other's like whole person, right? And on Zoom, we only see each other from like the neck up. and
Right.
we're staring straight into each other's, like, it's very almost confrontational in the way that our
Mm,
bodies are positioned.
mm,
And it's made me think more than ever about the way that we use body language in the therapeutic setting and just in general human interaction.
mm.
It's very unnatural to be at this angle with another person. Usually we have moments where we can look away, where we can disconnect from eye contact, where we can sort of give each other space, and you really
Right.
can't give each other that space in this.
Mm,
Although over the phone, I actually find to be more, there are more benefits to it. I think sometimes people will speak about more vulnerable, more difficult topics than they might bring up over Zoom or even in person, because there is a, like, you don't have to look at the other person while you tell them something difficult.
right. Right.
Um, they don't have to see you cry if
Right.
you're crying. So there's a certain intimacy to that, to
Mm,
the work over the phone, that actually is not so bad.
mm,
But I put it in quotes because I just want to be back to work in person with people. I know that it's not a good idea
right.
for me or for them, and I work with a lot of people who have um, chronic medical conditions, and I don't want them to put their lives at risk by any means. But I do, if I could snap my fingers and make this all change, I would not want to work from home anymore.
Right. Amen. Amen to that. I think a lot of people are in that boat.
Yeah.
And I think that point about how the phone is probably a little bit easier for people. Really, it resonates with me certainly because I mean, I can talk on the phone with friends for hours, but even after like an hour of Zoom, I mean, it's just so difficult. I mean, both in terms of the body language and the kind of the confrontational nature of that, and then also just for the eyes. I mean, staring at the screen so intently, and you're really trying to focus and you want to seem focused, but it's just a lot. So how's that been for you personally, trying to take care of yourself and your health, while
Yeah.
staring at a screen? Is it difficult, or do you ever wear like blue eye glasses or practice your blinking or anything? I don't know.
I haven't tried those glasses. I've been hearing about them, but I haven't
Yeah.
tried them. Um, I think that, yeah, after several like sessions in a row, I get Zoom fatigue for sure,
Yeah.
just like brain fog kind of.
Mm,
And the way I've been dealing with that, I don't know if I've found a really great way of dealing with that yet, but I try to mix it up in between being on, like, in a meeting like this. I will try to go for a walk in the middle of the day, or like go into the other room of my apartment and see a new thing. That's one advantage to working from home, is you can kind of mix things up a little bit. Like, you have a half an hour in the middle of the day, oh, like, let me get the dishes done, or let me
right.
go water my plants or whatever. And it can kind of take your mind off of it. I think, in the mental health field, people talk a lot about, another in quotes, self-care. That's like a
Mm,
huge concept that people love to talk about, and it's very important. I think sometimes it gets a lot of lip service and
yeah.
not a lot of actual space.
Mm,
But I found that more than ever, I have to set boundaries for myself between work and the rest of life. That was already sort of a challenge for me, even when I did go into an office to work, because just I think of the emotional nature of the work that I do. You sometimes take it home with you,
right.
um, and I would sometimes have trouble kind of creating an invisible boundary of now I'm off the clock and I'm not going to think about work. I'm not going to think about my clients. I'm going to, like, do something else. And
Right.
now more than ever, I'm work and I live in the same space. So I try to not answer emails after whatever time I've kind of logged off,
Mm.
or phone calls or texts from work people or from clients. Try to really make a hard boundary there, but that is always something that I've struggled with. So I don't know how well I'm doing with it.
Yeah, I think the work life balance has always been an issue, and it seems to have been more of an issue of late, pre-COVID, with employers asking, their employees to just be on for more hours of the day. A lot of companies expect you to answer emails on the weekend, or you get a Slack notification, you're supposed to respond, and just like, well, I can never get a separation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's difficult. So
Yeah.
speaking, to that telehealth factor, a lot of employers are seeking to reduce costs in light of the recession. and there's pushes for increases in telehealth. How do you see maybe the future of social work? Will in-person counseling be harder to come by?
I think from what I've heard that yes, there will be a push towards that. In my particular job and field, I'm not sure. The program that I work within is all grant funded. We don't bill insurance.
Mm.
So the grants might change and that we might kind of lose access to certain streams of state or city or federal funding. Like that could definitely happen. But in terms of like the pressure that a lot of providers are under due to like billing insurance and wanting, the insurance companies want you to spend the least amount of time you can with the patient or the client, and stack them all up. And telehealth is a great way of just like cutting down on waste, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know that the type of program that I work within, which we get our funding from like the State Office for Children and Family Services and from several HIV/AIDS funders, because we have a large grant for working with people who are HIV positive, providing counseling. So I'm not sure if those will be affected by that. I really hope not, because I think there's something very lost in doing the work. I feel like I froze.
No, you're good.
Okay, sorry. There's
No,
something
okay.
very lost in doing the work through a screen.
Yeah.
And I think that also I noticed I work with a certain amount of the caseload that I have is single, middle-aged or older people, particularly some of the clients who are living with chronic illness. And a lot of the human connection thing I was talking about is just like having another person in your life who you are accountable to see weekly and catch up with and, share with. And if we lose that in-person connection, I think there's a lot of people who will be left alone, people who don't have a social safety net, who aren't living with others, who don't have that to rely on. So yeah, I worry about that shift, although I think it is sort of inevitable.
Yeah, it's a concern of mine. I mean, it's a concern of mine in this field. It's also a concern of mine in terms of education. I mean, certainly, I mean, I understand, from the capitalist point of view, cutting costs and whatnot. But I mean, from the human point of view, certainly, I mean, the cost is far greater than the dollar signs. I mean, we can't overstate how important it is to be in person, to be with somebody, whether it be in education or in social work.
Totally.
And yeah, I mean, I have questions about sort of that routine aspect of coming into the office and whatnot. But before we get there, I have a question, in terms of there was a concern going into the quarantine that there would be an increase in cases of domestic violence and substance abuse. I'm wondering, has this been the case for you? And I know, because of confidentiality, of course, you probably can't get too specific, but what have you seen in terms of that? Has it been as bad as people predicted?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can only sort of speak anecdotally to what I've seen in my particular little thing. I have been, though, hearing that domestic violence has really jumped, and not necessarily incidences, but also just people being stuck in their home with their abuser, or not having the kind of opportunities to leave that they might have had before. So that's definitely true. I'm the addictions piece, like the substance use part of the question, I can definitely speak to. I work with people who are struggling, either currently using or in recovery, whether it's long-term recovery or very new recovery. And this has been really, really, really challenging for them. NA and AA are holding, a lot, other 12-step groups are holding meetings. Apparently, my clients tell me, like, around the clock on Zoom. Anytime you need a meeting, you can find one within 5 minutes. It's like
Great.
which is really great.
Yeah.
And I think was actually happening before this, but now so many more people are taking advantage of that. And I actually hear only kind of positive things about that. So from people who are going to meetings. So that's great. But I think the stressors of being surrounded either by surrounded by family members or people you live with, which can be triggering when you don't have your normal routines,
Totally.
or being super isolated and not having contact with others is like really exacerbating people's need to use drugs, to drink, to use any kind of coping strategies that might not be super healthy. Like I, you know, don't have a substance use problem, but I'm having more glasses of wine than usual, you know, and I'm eating a lot more than usual. Like I think we're all reaching for the things that give us comfort. And if you're someone who gets comfort from using drugs or from alcohol or other addictive substances, now is a really hard time. Because people are bored also. I think boredom and lack of structure is a really challenging thing for people who have addictions. And when you don't have your usual structure, you can't go do your usual thing. It's just like, what are they supposed to do? You know, people tell me like, I used again this week. I don't know, like, let's go back to square one. Okay, like I need to make a plan. I need to connect with someone when I'm feeling the urge to use or whatever it is. But you can connect with someone on the phone, but it's not the same, right? Like people aren't getting the same stuff. So that is definitely very challenging right now. But I will say that there are resources available, like, and the, I don't think anyone can kind of use the excuse that they couldn't find a meeting, because the meetings are everywhere. So if that's something that people use, then that's like really present. And I've heard that outpatient substance use programs are also like taking new intakes and like taking in people for like online virtual groups and substance abuse counseling and everything. So those things are out there, and everyone's making a big effort. Service providers are making a big effort to like shift to a virtual way of doing it. But yeah, actually this reminds me, I don't know if you have questions about this, but when we're talking about lack of structure and boredom, kids are having a really hard time. Not all kids. I've seen some kids who struggle with like social anxiety or things like that. Even ADHD, who have trouble concentrating at school. Some of them are actually thriving in a remote learning setting. Because they don't have to kind of contend with the things that were making school hard for them. But that's a small portion. I think for the most part, kids are really lacking in structure and lacking in like the social safety net that school really provides for a lot of families. So I have a bunch of teen clients, you know, I call them and it's like 3 p.m. and they say, I just woke up. Or mom says, she's sleeping. And I talk and I'm like, what's going on? What's your sleep schedule? And it's like, oh, I go to bed at 5 a.m. and I wake up at 4 p.m. And, you know, it's just like there's nothing to kind of hold people accountable, especially if parents are working or parents are essential workers and leaving the house. It's like, it's madness. So I think it's really hard. It's going to be really hard for kids to readjust.
Yeah, that readjustment is huge. It's interesting. I like the, you know, the silver lining, at least for, you know, people with ADHD. This has been helpful. Perhaps this could be thoughts about, you know, more remote learning for students who have those sorts of disabilities, because it might be more beneficial than going back to a crowded, noisy school. But certainly, I think for the majority of students, this has been very difficult for all the reasons you laid out. And that social aspect is something that I've been thinking about a lot. You know, just, I mean, that's such a key part of school, is the socializing and being around other students. And there's already all these other aspects of our lives, like, you know, the internet and social media, which are drawing us away from each other and making it more difficult to socialize and to understand people based on their emotions and their body language and their facial expressions. And I don't know, that's definitely a big concern for me, thinking about Gen Z, although I'm basically bordering on Gen Z. But
yeah, aren't you Gen Z?
I'm a little more in the millennial camp, but I relate to the Gen Zers as well, you know.
Yeah.
I got to take.
And maybe in certain ways it's easier on them because they're used to technology, like they're digital natives or whatever it is. And, you know, a 50, 60-year-old person in the workforce is maybe less used to how to figure out Zoom and all of those things. It depends. Everyone is different. I can't speak to all.
Absolutely.
But, you know, I think that the younger generation is definitely having a in certain ways an easier time transitioning into that technology
Definitely.
because it's just
Right. It's
part of their
intuitive.
lives.
Right.
Yeah.
They know how to use it. The only thing, despite them being digital natives, they still have, we still have the primal DNA. We still have those aspects of like that that are very base and internal, and maybe we'll see shifts over much longer periods of time. But, it's interesting to see how those two aspects, coincide a bit.
Yeah. And that coincides with when I'm trying to do quote unquote telehealth with like a 13-year-old,
Yeah.
and he's sort of answering every other question I ask. And then I'm like, are you playing a video game right now? It's like, I can't control the environment
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And I want confidentiality. So I don't want the parent in the room controlling the environment for me, but it's really hard. Like they're better at it than me. Like they can play a game on their computer without me knowing that they're actually using a different tab and they are not looking at me at all.
Wow. Yeah, that's something I didn't even think about, that environment fact. Like, of course, I understand, like, the being on Zoom versus being in a room with somebody, but you forget about all the, they're on Zoom, but on their other browser, they've got, I've been playing a Flash game while we've been talking. So.
Yeah, I figured.
No, of course not. So yeah, I know based on the bio you gave me, and we've talked about this a little bit, you're a therapist for adults and adolescents and families. Which group have you seen been impacted the most by this, and maybe which the least?
I think kids are impacted a lot. Like I said, I don't know. I think they're all being impacted in a certain type of way.
Sure.
When I do family therapy where I'm, sitting in a room with two or more members of a family, usually around kind of family dynamics and conflicts that's arising or various things. I'm seeing that people are in need of conflict resolution, and families are really in need of support, because being in small spaces together and being kind of forced into so much togetherness and so much time together without the distraction of school for the kids or work for the adults or whatever it is really putting a lot of pressure on families, and any problematic dynamics that were in place before are just being magnified. So I'm thinking about like children's behavior issues that are just kind of going off the walls, or couples who had kind of difficult dynamics before this and now they're kind of forced together. That's not to say that some families aren't doing really well together and actually benefiting from the time together and the time to kind of focus on one another, but I think a lot of families are kind of in a new kind of crisis. But yeah, I think all the different age groups and populations are struggling in different ways.
Sure.
But I do also want to say that I have clients who are actually doing fine. It's not everyone who's totally wrecked by this, and I've been kind of starting to accumulate this kind of understanding that certain people, especially people who might have been struggling with chronic health conditions before this, or living with trauma symptoms, trauma experiences, or just people who have sort of been feeling already like the world is not a safe place for various reasons, things that they've experienced in their lives. Some of those people I think are saying like, oh, now everyone sees what I was dealing with this whole time, right? Like someone who has a compromised immune system from living with HIV is like, well, I'm always scared of getting the flu. Like if I get the flu, I could die, right? And now I'm scared of getting COVID, but I feel like, everyone else is sort of like on my level.
Right.
Or people who, have PTSD and struggle with trauma symptoms. They're like, yeah, everyone's anxious now. Everyone's freaked out. I'm always freaked out. And like, and so I've noticed, this is totally anecdotal, this is not research at all,
Sure.
But I've noticed that there are certain people who are kind of, it's business as usual in a certain type of way, which I think some people have developed the tools to live in a world that doesn't feel safe to them. And now that everyone else doesn't feel safe either, and we're kind of freaked out by this virus, they might have stronger tools to deal with it than I do, or than some of us do. So I think I'm noticing that resiliency in people and the strength that some people really bring to the table already because of what they've experienced in their lives.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like a silver lining to, not necessarily a great thing to begin with, that people were struggling before, but that people have developed tools. And this isn't the first, for me as a relatively privileged person, I can say, oh, I'm finally like in the same boat as my clients, right? Like we're all dealing with the same thing now versus before when they were coming to me with various crises, and I'm like, well, this, my life's stable, yours isn't, right? And now we can all sort of say like, oh, our lives are, we're going through a similar thing. That being said, some people, it hits certain people harder than others, and it definitely doesn't hit me as hard as a lot of people I work with. But I might not have all the tools to deal with it emotionally, mentally, that some of the people that I work with do. So kudos to them, I guess.
Yeah, that's certainly kudos to them. I mean, I think the point that you raised, it has leveled the playing field to a certain degree. So yes, some people have been impacted more, but definitely we were all brought down to at least a certain level, because we all have to grapple with this. And I think as you build up the tools of how to grapple with it and how to return to business as usual a bit, it also helps mitigate the fears of the virus. And what will I do if I catch it? I think that's also been a circumstance, just because over time we've gained more knowledge of the virus and how it spreads and whatnot. And at the beginning, of course, it was extremely scary and there was a lot of concern, and now we have a better idea and whatnot. So I think that's helped to a certain degree also. But certainly, building good habits and working on the tools of how to cope and how to get back to a life that you recognize, is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah. I don't know if you've talked to any like healthcare workers or anything like that, but have you heard from other people like anything similar in regards to, I don't know, what I'm saying about people's mental health? Like, have you talked to doctors? I haven't looked at every single episode.
Okay. Okay, most people haven't watched every episode. I'm trying to get a doctor on. The issue with trying to get healthcare workers and doctors on is they're so busy and so burnt out when they do have a little free time or when they're off shift, that I don't think they're trying to hop on a Zoom call. But I am in the process of trying to get someone on. But yeah, no, that hasn't been too effective. The people who I've talked to the most, I think, have been teachers. I've talked to some teachers, an administrator, some students. So I've gotten kind of all different sides of the educational sphere. So that's been interesting on that side. But I would like to have more healthcare workers on. I think that's certainly a big aspect. And I talked about mental health with somebody earlier on who was a preschool teacher and had worked in the service industry. And that was she talked about how it had been a struggle, and that was also very earlier on in the crisis when things were a lot scarier and more uncertain, and over time we get better with that. But yeah, sorry, there's a motorcycle. I don't know if you
I can hear it. Yeah.
You can hear it. Yeah, that's New York City. So yeah, I mean, I know I mentioned this a while ago that I would get to this question, but about sort of schedule and order and routine. How important is that for our psychological and mental health? Both just generally, and then also in the wake of this loss of standard order and schedule.
I think it's very, very helpful. Everybody's different. Some people function in chaos, and that works for them. I'm not like that, and I see that a lot of people actually kind of fall apart when there's no order. So I think it's incredibly helpful to have some amount of order in life. That being said, I don't think that we should all hold ourselves to the same standards in terms of productivity, in terms of productivity is the big one that we did before, right? Like we have to recognize that life is different now. If you're working from home, it's not just that you're doing your same job, but now you sit on your couch. Instead, it's like you're at home coping with what's going on for you mentally and otherwise in terms of dealing with COVID. And you're also supposed to be working. So it's like an added thing on top. And I think a lot of people feel this pressure to like keep up the productivity, whether that's the pressure they're getting from their job or, you know, I'm friends with a lot of artists, artistic creative types who are like, I should be writing my novel, I should be creating my next best thing because I have all this time and whatever. And I think that if we expect that of ourselves, and structure ourselves too much, it's gonna fall apart, because that's sort of ignoring the reality, right? That
Absolutely.
there is something big going on, and I don't want to ignore that. That being said, I think like waking up at a consistent time every day and going to sleep at a fairly consistent time, at least during the weekdays, and then you can feel like your weekends are actually different than your weekdays if
Right.
you let yourself stay up late on a Saturday night, because there isn't much else to differentiate, right? Like
Right.
if you don't have those things.
Yeah.
Um, so that kind of structure, also in terms of work, like I found that it's been really helpful for me to have like one room or one area of a room that's designated for where I do work, and then the other parts of the apartment are sort of open for life.
Mm.
In terms of setting boundaries, like I said, like going for a walk once I clock out, and like I've heard people even sort of like replicate their commute a little bit, like in the
Mm.
morning go out and take a walk around the block and then come home and start your day, and then in the
Like
afternoon like
that.
take a walk around the block and come home and make dinner, because like you just kind of created your own separation.
Right.
So however it works for you, um, and whatever works, I think creating some kind of structure is extremely key, because it can start to feel like you're in one of those like hostage situations where you have to like write the number of days on the wall so you don't forget, you know, day 59 or whatever. If you don't do a little bit to sort of differentiate time, work from leisure, day from night, all of those things.
Yeah, yeah, no, it all, it just becomes an infinite scroll, and it's just like, where am I? Who am I? What day is it? What time is it?
Right.
You're looking at the sun. You're trying to judge what what hour of the day it is. It's like, it's a little crazy.
Yeah, and I've been giving that advice, particularly since we spoke about this before, to my clients who are dealing with substance use, because actually I think structure is a hugely important thing for people who are trying to stay clean or trying to stay sober. And
Definitely.
I've been giving that as advice of like, try to regulate your sleep schedule, try to regulate your meal schedule, try to keep yourself like accountable to certain things, so that you can kind of get through the day without it kind of spiraling out of control. So
Yeah, yeah. The sleep schedule is definitely on point there. I mean, there've been a lot of science backing that up about the importance of keeping a routine of a sleep schedule, and you can have similarly to someone's diet. You can have sort of a cheat day. You can have a day where you stay up late, or a day where you eat a plate of cookies. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But as long as at 6 days out of the week, or 5 days out of the week, you're consistent, and it definitely helps differentiate. And
yes.
I like that anecdote about the morning and the evening commute. I won't be hopping on the subway to replicate it, but but I like the idea of walking around the block in the morning before you begin, just taking a little time. I mean,
Yeah.
you want to maximize the productivity, but I mean, you also need to give yourself the time that you had before. Like, we all had a commute before that was natural, or most of us had a commute that was natural. That was just a little time before you began the workday. I know some friends of mine were just like waking up and hopping onto their Google Doc or whatever. And I was just like, that doesn't seem. I mean, if it works for you, that's
Right.
okay. But
And I won't say that I don't do that a lot of the time, like, but I know that it feels bad when I do it. I'm not like, it's
right,
not that I've been so successful in changing it every
right,
day, but
right.
it feels very bad when I
Yeah.
like get out of bed and 5 minutes later I'm like on my computer typing and
Yeah. It's like your
like,
brain is still waking up, and
yeah, and I'm like chugging coffee and it's like, this isn't the way it's supposed to be.
yeah, your lower back starts hurting. You're like, oh, I was supposed to stretch a little bit this morning.
Yeah.
So, how can we, I know routine and schedule, sometimes that wears on people because it feels like kind of a repetitive drag. How can we maybe give it a little pep?
It's a good question. I think, yeah, giving it a little pep brings to mind for me like having things to look forward to. Because when things start to drag and everything every day feels the same, and a lot of things have been canceled, right? Like summer's here and all our vacations have probably been canceled, or plans with friends or whatever, the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So I think finding ways to have things to look forward to, whether it be like this weekend I'm going to go, making plans, I guess is my point. Because not every day can be um, particularly interesting, and it is kind of a drag. But if you can make a plan, like this weekend I'm going to go sit on my friend's stoop and socially distance hang out with her, and it won't be the same as it would have been if we were going to the concert that we had tickets for, and that was going to be so great this weekend, but we can't do it. But we can still like make a plan to do that and kind of keep things keep things to look forward to. I guess also I would say, this sounds corny, but like finding moments of joy in the monotony.
Mm.
Like remembering like I should put on like fun music and dance, even if I'm like alone in my house or with my partner, with my roommate or whatever. We can't go out to the bar, to the club, to wherever we would have gone to dance previously, but like we could bring it to us or something.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I tend to forget about like those moments. I'll get into the drag routine of like you get up, you do work, then you just watch Netflix for 5 hours and then you go to sleep.
Yeah.
And Netflix can be really awesome and soothing and great, but after a while it doesn't feel special anymore to like sit down and watch TV. So yeah, planning things that are like a little out of the ordinary, even if it's 5 days away, you can still have it to look forward to.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Having sort of little things to look forward to in all the monotony. I've definitely been doing a little solo dance party over here, throwing a little Stevie Wonder,
Perfect. Yeah.
boogie on, as they say. I like that a lot. You mentioned, you have some friends, artistic friends, creative friends who have felt pressure to sort of produce in this environment. And I think that's been very difficult, with mass unemployment and people being sick, plus the fear of getting sick. Our sense of safety has been sort of taxed quite heavily, alluding to a little bit of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I studied in my Psych 101 class.
Excellent.
So how can we reach that upper echelon of, self-actualization while the safety level is being attacked so heavily? Or is it just not realistic to reach that and just cut ourselves maybe a little slack?
Yeah, I would be in the camp of cutting yourself some slack. I think I'm hearing about things that people are friends or acquaintances or people are working on in terms of artistic projects or organizing or bringing things to fruition. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to bring things into new kind of like spaces, like comedians who are doing stand-up shows on Instagram Live, or like musicians who are doing DJ sets that like thousands of people are tuning into. And it's bringing about new opportunities to kind of get your self-actualization, get your art, get whatever you're working on out there. And if that is exciting to people and it feels like it's working, by all means, I think people should continue to like take advantage of those things. But I think we should all be cutting ourselves a lot of slack, and to recognize that, we as a nation kind of went into lockdown around beginning mid-March. And although it's shocking how long it's been, like every time I realize it's almost June, I'm like, it's incredible. Like I can't even believe it. But really that's not actually that long. And this will not be life forever.
Right.
Certain things about life will never go back to the way they were. Like I don't think, whatever, Dr. Fauci said we're never going to shake hands again. I don't know about that, but but certain things will be different.
Definitely.
But there will be some amount of normalcy that comes back. And I think we kind of get ahead of ourselves, like, oh, it's been 3 months and I haven't self-actualized. And it's like, well, you'll have more time.
Right.
And if we cut ourselves some slack now, we might have more energy when the time comes to kind of reopen. I've been hearing from a lot of people that they actually have more anxiety about how to go back into the world when things start to reopen. What will it be like? Will it be different? Will I have a hard time working, going to work, commuting, doing all those things that I used to do, socializing, now that I've gotten used to this new normal of like we do everything inside and we stay home. So if we can like all gather our strength a little bit and give ourselves pass to do things that feel rejuvenating and relaxing, whether or not that's productive,
Right.
I think we'll have more energy and strength for when the time comes to go back out into the world. If that does that make sense?
Definitely makes sense. I like that a lot. I mean, I'm all for cutting a little slack, but at the same time, still working on good habits and good tools. But
Sure.
not trying to expect the most of yourself. You don't have to get that novel out just because you have a bunch of more free time on your hands. Like,
Right.
people, time is such it's a fickle thing. It's always escaping us. We feel this rush for it. We gotta do, but it's just like, no, it's okay. Take
Yeah,
a
and I
walk
feel
around the
that
block.
too. Right. I feel that too. And I was saying to a friend the other day, like, it's so strange. I feel like time is on pause. Everything is on pause, except I'm still getting older.
Yeah,
It's like I've never felt older than I do right now. Like, just like
same.
I'm aging,
Yeah,
but you can't really like do all the things that you thought you were gonna do to
yeah,
like propel your life forward. So it's a very, yes, it's a fickle thing, and it's very disconcerting. Um,
definitely.
but the thing that I do is remind myself, like, it's only actually been a few months, and chill.
I
Just
like that.
chill.
I like that. Yeah, no, the age, that's a great point. I mean, I've definitely felt that. I turned 24 actually May 9th.
Happy
Um,
birthday.
thank you. And it was, we did a little Zoom call with the family, and that was very nice. But I definitely felt it in a way I have never felt before. And I felt there was a lot of anxiety around it because I was like, oh, I'm 24, but I haven't done this and I haven't done that, and I'm not at this level. And it was just like all these things were coming down on me. And then I just had to like think about it, like, you got to cut yourself a little bit of slack here. Like, there's a global pandemic going on. It's okay if you haven't reached those things, and they will come. You will continue to work on them, both in the quarantine and afterwards. And, time will go on. And even if maybe, by the time they're putting you 6 feet under, you didn't check off everything on the list. It's okay. There's no score afterwards. Nobody's counting. So,
Right. And
you know.
everyone will look back and say, oh, but in 2020 there was a pandemic, so it's fine. Don't worry about
Yes, yes, yes. I like.
it. We'll all remember that this happened. And like,
I will do.
and I think about like kids who are graduating from college right now or graduating from high school right now, and it's like, oh, entering into this crazy time of mass unemployment and all of that. Um, that's huge. And also, everyone will, in 5 years, if there's a gap in your resume, people will say like, oh, but that was in 2020,
Right,
right? Like,
right,
we know this is
right,
like something we're all dealing with
right.
as a, actually not just as a nation, but as a world. So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not your, I guess I'm trying to say, like, if people can take some of the onus off of themselves of personal responsibility around this, and actually put more of that on the government, which hasn't always done such a stand-up job of dealing with this pandemic, right? Or of all of the issues of inequality that already existed, that are just being magnified now. And if we can not so much take personal responsibility for our own individual failures around this, and just think about it more in terms of like a systemic failure that's
Right.
happened, it takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, there's never been a better time to blame the government. I mean, this is that there's definitely been quite a few miscues in that regard.
Right.
And yes, nobody will ever. We won't ever forget this. The people who lived through this, and even the people who are in the womb right now, they'll be taught about this in school. They'll be taught about the pandemic of 2020.
Right. Right.
So closing out, this one's not related to social work. I like to end the COVID chats with this. It's just 5 things or a few things that you can't wait to do again.
When we can go out into the world. Okay.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
I'm excited to, I've been hearing that this is that maybe they'll never come back, but let's just pretend they will, go out to restaurants again, because that's one of my favorite and one of the things that gives me the most joy about living in New York is good
Yeah.
food. So, and I used to work I was a server for a long time, bartender. I worked in restaurants, so that
Very cool.
kind of world I really miss a lot.
Yeah.
Um, Also going to the movies.
Mm,
I do like to watch movies at home like anyone else, but going to the movies is like a small indulgence that I do love, and I
totally.
really miss that. Um, I would say spending time out outdoors in New York City. Like I go for walks. I've been trying to go to Prospect Park like in very sort of limited ways, but being able to freely be outside
Yeah.
um, around other people and not have that anxiety of
Yeah.
how close am I getting? Is that person wearing a mask? Am I wearing a mask? I
Right.
just want to be done with that and spend
Yeah.
time outside. Yeah. And then I would say the last thing, I guess just like be at a party, like
Yeah.
be with we
Woo.
be with a bunch of people, a party or some kind of like social gathering,
Yeah.
and just not be thinking about safety the whole time.
Yes.
That will be really monumental when we get to that place, and that might be years away. I don't know, but I just want to like feel free to be with others, and all brings it back to like human connection. That's what I'm looking for both at work and in my regular life. Like I just want to be connecting with people. So
Yeah. Yeah. That the not having the fear and just being able to feel safe in your environment is so big. And I know on the if when I was on the subway with my dad, if somebody would cough or sneeze or something, we would like move a little further away from them on the car. But like in the wake of this, if somebody sneezed on the subway, it was like everybody like probably flipped. I mean, of course there were less people on the subway, but it will
yeah.
be nice to go back to somebody coughs near you and it's not the end of the world. It's just all right. Maybe they just were choked on a little saliva or something. It's they don't have COVID necessarily.
Right. Back when I was still taking the subway, like in the first few weeks of this, I did see a guy. He was drinking water, and then it like clearly went down the wrong pipe or whatever, and he was coughing, and everybody flipped their head towards him and like was staring at him, and he was like, "I choked on my water. This is my water. It's just look, I have my water," and it was like, oh, now we have to defend ourselves, right? And
Right.
like
Right.
the idea that we actually like have a virus. It's just I want that to be no longer in the picture.
Please, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Well, Sophie, thank you very, very much for this comprehensive conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ruben. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Great to catch up too. Been a long time, but
Yeah.
was worth it. Absolutely.